Jets are always stealing the show, but air power is more than that. Often, when urgent help is needed on the ground, whether in a humanitarian crisis, to stabilize a region, or to quickly deploy reinforcements, governments don't call the fighter community. Instead, they hit up air mobility with transport aircraft like this one to bring in food, material, and troops. This is the A400M. It's a plane you may have seen at an airshow. Perhaps you were even inside one. While many transporters exist, the A400M is an interesting one. It sits right in the middle of the pack, between the small transport aircraft like the Spartan, the C-295, or the Hercules, and of course the big ones, the C-5 and the C-17. Now, small transporters tend to excel in rough landing environments and short runways, while the large planes carry the heavy load. So does this mean that the A400M, being middle of the pack, is a jack of all trades but master of none? Well, it is seeing a lot of success, and that made me curious to find out more. So I reached out to Airbus and spoke to Ed Horn at a recent airshow. Ed used to fly C-130s and A400s with the RAF before being with Airbus. So if we want the perspective of someone who knows the aircraft from both the practitioner and the industry side, he is the man to talk to.
The A400M really fits in between those smaller, let's say, traditional air transport aircraft of a payload up to around about 20 tons.
Yeah.
And this aircraft carries a payload of 37 tons, which is less than those huge aircraft like the C-5 and the C-17. But the thing about this aircraft is versatility, because it has a long-range capability for what we call strategic air transport, but also tactical air transport capabilities, landing on unpaved runways, short runways, delivering vehicles, troops, cargo, equipment onto the ground, or of course out to the back of the aircraft under a parachute.
So we'll talk inside the aircraft about those roles as well. Let's say maybe have a little bit of a walk around coming towards the nose. And I just wanted to talk about the engines, because obviously you need quite powerful engines on a machine like this. What do we have here then?
These are the Europrop International TP400, and they're 11,000 horsepower each. The propellers are unique in this kind of aircraft, because as we're looking at the propellers here, if they were turning, you'd see them turning in opposite directions, and that's to help the directional stability of the aircraft. And of course they can be put into reverse thrust, and the stopping power of this aircraft, let me tell you, is amazing.
And that helps you then to contract the runway that you actually need to land.
Yes.
So talk to me about, like, with a nominal load, let's say of 20 tons or anything like that, what would your landing distances be then?
It's a really short landing distance, around about 900 feet. But it really just depends on the altitude of the airfield, the temperature of the day, and the payload and the amount of fuel that's on board. But this aircraft can carry up to 50,000 kilos of fuel, which is the thing that gives it its really long range here in the wings above us.
And I mean, as we're landing, I think, obviously we're here at a conventional sort of airfield. We've got a paved runway. Can you also land on less prepared airstrips?
Yes, for sure. The A400M can land on the normal kind of runway, like here we are today, but also on sand, gravel, grass, and the Royal Air Force, which this aircraft belongs to, regularly train landing on a beach in the southwest of the UK.
Oh, wow, okay. And is there anything special with the gear then as well? Because I think I read somewhere that you can kneel the aircraft to facilitate better loading.
The landing gear is one of the most important parts of any aircraft, of course, but it's the landing gear here on the A400M that really gives it that ability to land on very soft surfaces. And the reason for that is on each side are 6 wheels. So you have 12 main wheels altogether, and that can spread the load of the aircraft, which could be up to 141 tons, over a much wider area than some of those traditional aircraft that we talked about that maybe only have 4 main wheels.
Interesting. Now, as we can go towards the cargo hold, as an airlifter, you don't necessarily expect this aircraft to go where there's danger, but does it have any sort of countermeasure system, sensors, Any redundancy put in place, protected fuel tanks?
The aircraft was designed from the outset to be survivable.
Yeah.
So lots of the aircraft systems, let's say the hydraulic system, for example,
Yeah.
are rooted in different areas around the aircraft to make it survivable in a battlefield environment. And different customers have different defensive aid systems,
Yeah.
but for sure they are fitted to the aircraft.
And then you can sort of modularly build that into the aircraft depending on what the client
Depending
wants.
on what the customer's requirements are, yeah.
So let's go then to the loading bay. Obviously, there are two doors here. One opens outwards, one opens inwards. The mission set that you have, I mean, it's an air tanker as well.
Yeah.
But primarily, let's talk about the cargo. So you said how many tons fit in here again?
37 tons of payload.
Oh, yeah.
But really, one of the things about the A400M compared to those smaller aircraft
Yeah.
is the volume. I mean,
Yes.
you can see it right here, and the height of the cargo bay is really important because that's the same height as a C-17.
Okay.
So where we have air forces either that have a C-17 and an A400M, like the Royal Air Force in the UK,
Yeah.
or where they're cooperating, interoperating between different air forces, the ability to transfer the same cargo quickly from one aircraft to another can be really important.
And considering this volume, then what fits in here? I mean, of course, pallets, so just general cargo that we would assume. What about vehicles? Helicopters?
Yes, vehicles, helicopters, vehicles with just normal wheels, vehicles with tracks,
Okay.
like a small tank or tracked vehicle.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing about the height of the cargo bay is really important for carrying helicopters because it means you don't need to dismantle quite so much of the helicopter,
Okay.
which means it's much quicker to rebuild it when you get to your destination, and then it can be off and flying. We can even carry a CH-47 Chinook inside the A400M, thanks to the size.
Volume, yeah. And when you're doing cargo, I mean, you do combat offloads and I guess airdrops as well?
Yes, a combat offload is a capability where the pallets, military pallets of cargo with the ramp here in the horizontal position, and the aircraft powers forward, the cargo locks disengage, and the pallets come out the back and land on the ground. But of course, what this aircraft is really designed for from the outset is exactly what you were talking about, airdrop. And we have a couple of examples that we can see inside.
Well, let's have a look then. And as we go in, I see these rollers here. What are those?
Yeah, so we've got this here as a demonstration for visitors coming to the Farnborough Air Show. But these are for the container delivery system.
Yeah.
We have guidance rails on both sides. These ones are down at the moment, of course, to create
These
the
ones
walkway.
we see, they're up.
Yes, those ones there. And then this one here in the center, so that you can have two rows of containers.
Okay.
And of course, you need the rollers on the ramp, as well as inside the cargo bay to allow the containers to roll out.
Yeah.
And then behind you, you have the anchor cables.
Oh yeah, I see that, yeah.
And this is where the parachute static lines are connected.
Okay.
And as the containers come down the cargo bay, the static lines hit the stop, and that opens the parachute, and of course they float down to the ground to the drop zone.
How does, I mean, two questions there here really. First of all, for the pilot, does he have to do anything, or does that person have to do anything regarding the drop? Do they pitch up a little bit, or is there sort of a power boost for the delivery?
For container delivery system, it's gravity. So you're absolutely right. The aircraft needs to pitch to do that, and that can be done in one of two ways. Either the pilot can do it, or it can be automatically pre-programmed into the flight management system, and it can be done automatically. Even the release of the containers can be done manually, of course, but it can be programmed into the flight management system to be automatic. The aircraft can take 24 one-ton containers, and the system can be programmed in any combination of those 24. So imagine you fly to the first drop zone, you're going to deliver 2 containers of diesel fuel. You fly to the next drop zone, you're going to deliver 5 containers of humanitarian aid, and you fly to the next drop zone and you're going to drop the remaining containers of ammunition or something like that. It's really flexible.
And how do you, this goes into my second question, how do you achieve accuracy? Because I assume wind speeds are always going to be in factor.
Inside the flight management system is something called the CARP, the Computed Air Release Point, and that's programmed by the crew with things like the characteristics of the parachute, because each parachute performs slightly differently, the wind of the day, and with the combination of those factors, the flight management system makes a calculation and tells the pilot and the loadmaster in the back of the aircraft when to drop. And of course, you'll see the green light come on when it's ready to go.
Okay, then let's go in a bit further. You don't just do cargo, there is medevac, I assume?
So here we have just an example of the medevac station.
Yeah.
The aircraft is capable of carrying 66 stretchers. And if we had that configured inside the aircraft, you'd see them all down the sides.
Okay.
You'd see them through the center as well. But what our customers have found through their experience on recent operations and missions is that it's really important to be able to have 360-degree access around a badly injured patient. So they have developed this along with us. And in the A400M, typically you could have 4 of these stations down the center of the aircraft with the doctors and the medical professionals with all their equipment plugged in. For example, you would have bottles of oxygen here, for example.
Okay. Just next to medevac, you also do crew transports and paratroopers?
Yes.
And would those be sitting then along the lines?
Exactly.
Along the sides and also hook up in the same rails?
The anchor cables, yes, exactly. There are, we can have 116 seats here. We would have 54 seats along the sides, and then the seats set up in the center to give 116 troops. And then, of course, we're here next to the paratroop door, and this is where they would jump out.
Okay, interesting. And I also see some crew convenience things as water dispensers, and I assume we will see a little bit more down in the aircraft as well.
If you can imagine a full load of passengers or cargo, 116 seats, then it can be difficult to move around, especially if they have heavy packs in their parachutes and so on. So so here we have some conveniences, and in fact there's a toilet just there as well.
Okay. There's a toilet there?
Yes, these.
Whereabouts? Oh, these are the toilets?
These
okay.
here
Interesting.
for the passengers to use.
And on the other side as well? No, just on this side. Okay. Yeah. So let's go towards then the front of the aircraft, and we see some of the pallets here with the parachutes set up as well.
Yeah. So this is an example of CDS, container delivery system. In fact, this is a double-size container. The smaller containers would be half the size. This is a double board, and each container, whether it's a double size or a half size, can carry up to 1 ton of payload.
Okay.
And as long as it fits inside the container, it doesn't really matter what it is. Whatever is required on the ground, whether it's humanitarian aid, let's say water, blankets, food, that kind of thing, or fuel for vehicles, or ammunition, or anything that you can fit inside. Even like a mini quad bike or something like that would fit inside this.
Awesome. As we move then towards the front, where would the loadmaster be? Would he also be upstairs?
No, the loadmaster's domain is down here at the back of the aircraft, and this is really the most important part of the aircraft. I'm a pilot by my background, and I flew the A400M for 3 years, but you know, this is really what the aircraft was designed to do: carry the cargo, deliver the paratroopers. But the loadmaster has a workstation just over here.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Yes. And this is the entry hatch for the crew?
This is the crew entrance door, exactly, and you can see the steps up to the flight deck. But this is where the loadmaster can control all of the environmental parts of the aircraft, like the air conditioning, the lighting, which is very important, especially at night time. And if the crew are using night vision goggles, he or she can set the lighting in the way that they want. But also from here, the loadmaster can monitor all of the systems in the back of the aircraft, and also release those cargo locks that we were talking about, either manually or automatically.
Oh, interesting. Do you mind if we step up into the cockpit? There's a little cafeteria here as well.
Yes, coffee machine, there's an oven. The A400M, with those 50,000 kgs of fuel, could fly for up to 10 hours. And of course, you have to keep everybody fed and watered in that time. But the A400M is also capable of receiving fuel through air-to-air refueling.
Okay.
And for example, the Royal Air Force recently conducted a 20-hour mission, 20 hours and 36 minutes from the UK, from Bryce Norton to Guam in the Pacific. So I'm sure they needed a lot of food and water to keep them going. So it's really important. Yes.
Wow. So we have the pilot seat, or is that CM1, CM2, CM3? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
CM1, CM2, CM3. There's even CM4 just here as well.
Yeah. What does this person do? I mean, this seems like what we wouldn't expect, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
There's a combination of reasons for this.
Yeah.
The first one might be for an instructor. So imagine you have two pilots under training. They would have an instructor in the middle seat, making sure that they were following the correct procedures, giving them advice and instruction on whatever it might be. The other reason, and you can see here in front of you the screen. The screen is combined with some controls here, a keyboard for data input, and also down on this side, the trackball, which allows the crew member sat here to access all of the flight management system pages, so they can assist the pilots at the front. So you can have a third crew member for a complicated mission, let's say, something like that. They even have access to all of the radios as well, so that they can speak to people on the ground or airborne early warning aircraft or something like that.
So quite a flexible seat then in terms of tasks.
That's exactly the point. Exactly the point.
So, I mean, now I'm very curious. If we just take a seat, if that's possible, in your domain.
You go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, what would we do if we assume that we did all the pre-flight checks where the engines are spinning?
Yes.
How would we take this aircraft now into the sky?
Okay, we'd complete the checklist.
Yeah.
So you have here on the screen, rather than a paper checklist in those older aircraft that we were talking about, all of the checklists on the A400M are here on the screen, and they're controlled by this panel here.
Okay.
So let's imagine that we were, as you said, ready to take off.
Yeah.
So we would find the before takeoff checklist.
Yeah.
And we would both be checking the flight instruments. And on the A400M, the flight instruments are here inside the head-up display.
Oh, all in here, yeah.
So you can see in the head-up display the attitude of the aircraft, the speed, the altitude, all the information that you might need to fly the aircraft. And of course, to keep the pilot looking outside rather than looking in at the screens, various warnings and so on will also appear in the head-up display. We talked about defensive aids earlier, and the pilot would be alerted to threats as well inside the head-up display to keep them looking outside the cockpit as much as possible. But for sure, sometimes you have to look in, especially if you have a checklist. So we would complete that. I would tick that one off, and you can see it's turned a different color. And then the next check would be the flying controls. So on the A400M, we fly using the side stick and the rudder pedals as well.
Yeah.
But because of the fly-by-wire control, the rudder pedals, although they're there for use, in fact, the autopilot takes care of the yaw, the rudder pedals, more or less.
Yeah.
But of course, the pilot uses the side stick to fly, and we check the flying controls. We'd go through the full range of motion, making sure that all of the flying controls are moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
But you're going to ask me, how on earth can the pilot see those flying controls? Well, on the right-hand side, he would select the flying controls page, and he would see all of the control surfaces.
The reflection of those,
Exactly, moving, and as long as they're moving in the way that he or she would expect, then that check would be complete. And both pilots would do that.
Okay, interesting.
And then there would be a briefing.
Yeah.
So we would talk about the runway. We would talk about the departure, the direction that we're going to travel to. We'd have been given a clearance by air traffic control for a particular altitude, and we both verbalize that so everybody is clear exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And talking of the altitude, we'd set that here.
To the ground altitude?
No, this would be the final altitude given by air traffic control.
Okay.
Typically something like 3,000 feet.
Yeah.
So we'd set that, and the pilot would be alerted as they're approaching 3,000 feet in the head-up display.
Okay.
And if the autopilot was engaged, which is this panel here, autopilot 1, autopilot 2, then the autopilot would automatically level the aircraft off.
Okay.
So we've completed the briefing.
Yeah.
Then, and this is really important, we check our takeoff safety speeds.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're talking about 3 different speeds: V1, V rotate, and V2. V1 is really important because once you've passed V1, then you're going no matter what. If you lose an engine on takeoff, a bird strike or something like that, then after V1, then you're going. And of course, V rotate is the speed that you're going to actually lift off the ground. So it's important. So you check those. You'd make sure your IFF was on, your air traffic control modes and so on. You'd check that your radar was on. That's the panel down here. And in this case, a day like today, we'd have the weather radar on to make sure that we weren't going to fly into any thunderstorms or something like that. We'd make sure the windows are closed because that's kind of important when you want to take off. But we'd make sure they're locked because as you, if you went forward and it was unlocked, the window would pull back very quickly. Seat belts. So this isn't about your seatbelt or my seatbelt. This is about the seatbelts for the passengers at the back.
Okay.
And you can see it's blue at the moment. If I turn the seatbelt sign on, you can see that the aircraft has sensed I've moved the switch and it's turned that green. You'd select the flap setting that you wanted for takeoff. Depending on the length of runway and that kind of thing. The system used by the crew, the electronic flight bag, would have calculated the optimum setting for the length of runway. So we would do that, and then I'm not going to move it now, but
of course
the last check here, as you can see, is the auto brake.
Yeah.
This is the auto brake setting here.
Yeah.
And RTO here, which is the one to be selected, means rejected takeoff. So if the aircraft sensed an engine failure or some other major failure, then the braking system would automatically connect and stop the aircraft in a very short distance.
Okay. Fantastic. I know you have many commitments. One last final question.
Yes, sure.
Who's then taking off? Would it be CM1 and CM2, or are you supporting each other?
Typically, the Air Forces operate a pilot flying and a pilot not flying. And that could be either the captain, who would typically sit in the left-hand seat, or the co-pilot sitting in the right-hand seat. And in my experience, we just swapped each mission.
Okay.
You would take the duties of the pilot flying, and the other pilot would be the pilot not flying, who's then monitoring all of the systems, talking to air traffic control on the radio, and supporting the pilot flying. And it's the pilot flying who's manipulating the autopilot, who's flying using the side stick, and of course the thrust levers here in the middle.
Fantastic. Ed, thank you so much for this rundown of the A400. Greatly enjoyed it, and hope all of you did as well. Big thank you here to Airbus and of course Ed for your time. Please leave your appreciation also in the comments below. And as always, have a great day and see you in the sky.